Question 1. A behavior analyst is evaluating potential reinforcers for a client. They present several stimuli one at a time and record whether the client approaches, touches, or interacts with the stimulus. Which type of preference assessment is this? A. Paired stimulus. B. Multiple stimulus without replacement, MSWO. C. Free operant. D. Single stimulus. Answer: D. Single stimulus. This question describes a single stimulus preference assessment, also known as successive choice, which involves presenting stimuli one at a time to see if the client interacts with them. The phrase "one at a time" is the key clue. This method helps identify potential reinforcers by observing engagement, and it's often used for individuals who may have difficulty choosing between multiple items. For instance, showing a child one toy at a time and noting which ones they play with tells you about their preferences. Remember that single stimulus means checking items one by one. Question 2. Which of the following is a defining characteristic of a primary reinforcer? A. Its reinforcing value is learned through association with other reinforcers. B. It functions as reinforcement due to its biological importance. C. It is a social reinforcer, like praise or attention. D. Its effectiveness depends solely on the individual's history of reinforcement. Answer: B. It functions as reinforcement due to its biological importance. This question tests your understanding of primary reinforcers, which are naturally reinforcing because they satisfy biological needs, not because they've been paired with other things. The phrase biological importance directly points to this definition. Examples include food, water, and warmth when deprived. Unlike secondary reinforcers, which gain value through learning, primary reinforcers are inherently reinforcing, ensuring basic survival behaviors are maintained. Think of them as nature's motivators. You don't have to learn to like food when you're hungry. Question 3. A behavior technician is trying to teach a client to request for more when they want more of something. The client currently says more, but only when the technician prompts them by saying, "Say more." The technician wants the client to say more independently when they want the item. What prompting procedure is the technician currently using that they need to fade? A. Physical prompt. B. Gestural prompt. C. Echoic prompt. D. Visual prompt. Answer: C. Echoic prompt. This question describes an echoic prompt, which is when the teacher says the target response and the learner imitates it. The clue technician prompts them by saying, "Say more," is the giveaway that the technician is providing a vocal model for the client to repeat. To help the client say more independently, the technician will need to gradually reduce or fade this vocal prompt. For example, instead of saying "say more," they might just give an expectant look or use a partial sound like M to encourage the client's independent mind. An echoic prompt is essentially telling the learner what word to say. Question 4. A child frequently screams whenever they want attention from their parent. The parent usually responds by telling the child to be quiet and giving them attention. The behavior analyst recommends the parent stop responding to the screaming. This results in the screaming initially increasing in frequency and intensity before eventually decreasing. The temporary increase is known as A. Spontaneous recovery. B. Extinction burst. C. Punishment. D. Response differentiation. Answer: B. Extinction burst. This scenario describes an extinction burst, which is a temporary increase in the frequency, intensity, or variability of a behavior when extinction is first implemented. The parent's previous attention served as reinforcement for screaming, and when that reinforcement is withheld, extinction, the screaming gets worse before it gets better. The phrase initially increasing in frequency and intensity is the key indicator of an extinction burst. It's like the child is trying harder to get the attention they used to receive before giving up. Expect behaviors to get worse before they get better during extinction. Question 5. When conducting a functional analysis, which condition involves providing attention contingent on the target behavior occurring? A. Alone. B. Attention. C. Tangible. D. Play. Answer: B. Attention. A functional analysis involves systematically manipulating different environmental variables to determine which one maintains the target behavior. The question specifically asks about the condition where attention is provided when the behavior occurs. In a typical functional analysis design, the attention condition tests if the behavior is maintained by positive reinforcement in the form of social attention. For example, if screaming increases when attention is provided contingent on screaming, it suggests screaming is maintained by attention. The name of the condition itself is the biggest clue. Question 6. A behavior analyst is designing an intervention to teach a complex skill, like washing hands, to a client. The skill involves many steps performed in a specific order. Which teaching procedure is most appropriate for breaking down and teaching this skill? A. Discrete trial training, DTT. B. Natural environment teaching, NET. C. Pivotal response training, PRT. D. Chaining. Answer: D. Chaining. This question describes chaining, which is used to teach complex sequences of behaviors, or chains, where each step serves as a cue for the next step and a reinforcer for the previous step. The keywords complex skill, many steps, and specific order strongly suggest chaining is the appropriate method. Hand washing is a classic example of a task taught using chaining, where you might teach the steps from turning on the water to drying hands in sequence. Chaining is all about linking individual steps together to perform a larger task. Question 7. A behavior technician is teaching a client to identify colors. The technician holds up a red card and says, "Touch red." The client touches the red card. The technician then holds up a blue card and says, "Touch blue." The client touches the blue card. This is an example of what type of operant behavior? A. Mand. B. Tact. C. Echoic. D. Listener responding. Answer: D. Listener responding. This scenario describes listener responding, where the individual responds non-vocally to the verbal behavior of another person. The technician is giving a verbal cue, touch red, and the client is responding by touching the card, which is a non-vocal action. The prompt is auditory, listening, and the response is physical, touching. Teaching a client to follow instructions or discriminate between items based on verbal cues falls under listener responding. When someone tells you to do something and you do it, that's listener responding. Question 8. A parent is teaching their child to share toys. When the child successfully shares a toy with a sibling, the parent immediately gives the child a sticker and praises them. This is an example of A. Positive punishment. B. Negative punishment. C. Positive reinforcement. D. Negative reinforcement. Answer: C. Positive reinforcement. This question describes positive reinforcement, which involves adding a stimulus, the sticker, and praise, immediately following a behavior, sharing, resulting in an increased likelihood of that behavior occurring again in the future. The parent is adding something desirable, positive, to increase the behavior, reinforcement. Giving a child a treat for cleaning their room is another example of positive reinforcement. Remember, positive means adding something and reinforcement means the behavior increases. Question 9. Which of the following is the most accurate definition of a discriminative stimulus, SD? A. A stimulus that signals the availability of reinforcement for a particular behavior. B. A stimulus that signals that a behavior will be punished. C. A stimulus that automatically elicits a response. D. A consequence that increases the future frequency of a behavior. Answer: A. A stimulus that signals the availability of reinforcement for a particular behavior. An SD is a stimulus that is present when a specific behavior is reinforced and signals that reinforcement is available if the behavior occurs. This is the core definition. It doesn't automatically elicit a response like a reflex, nor does it signal punishment or function as a consequence. For example, a stop sign, SD, signals that pressing the brake behavior will be reinforced by avoiding an accident or ticket, reinforcement. An SD tells you now is the time to do the behavior to get the good stuff. Question 10. A behavior analyst is supervising a new technician. The analyst asks the technician to describe how they would implement extinction for a child's tantrum behavior that is maintained by escape from demands. Which of the following is the correct application of extinction in this scenario? A. Provide a preferred item immediately after the tantrum stops. B. Physically restrain the child until the tantrum stops. C. Present the demand and do not remove it or provide escape contingent on the tantrum. D. Time the tantrum and record its duration. Answer: C. Present the demand and do not remove it or provide escape contingent on the tantrum. This question tests your understanding of extinction applied to a behavior maintained by negative reinforcement, escape. If the tantrum's function is escape, extinction involves preventing that escape from occurring contingent on the tantrum. By keeping the demand present and not allowing the child to escape from it when they tantrum, you are withholding the escape reinforcement that previously maintained the behavior. Giving an item or physically restraining are not extinction procedures for escape-maintained behavior. To extinguish escape-maintained behavior, you block the escape. Question 11. A behavior analyst is conducting an assessment to determine the communicative function of a client's challenging behavior. The assessment involves observing the behavior in the natural environment and recording the antecedents and consequences surrounding it. What type of assessment is this? A. Functional analysis. B. Indirect assessment. C. Descriptive assessment. D. Skill acquisition assessment. Answer: C. Descriptive assessment. This question describes a descriptive assessment, which involves observing and recording the behavior and its environmental context, antecedents, and consequences, in the natural setting to identify correlations. The keywords observing, in the natural environment, and recording the antecedents and consequences are the defining features. This differs from a functional analysis, which manipulates antecedents and consequences, and indirect assessments, which involve interviews or checklists rather than direct observation. Descriptive assessments show correlations, helping you form hypotheses about why a behavior occurs. Question 12. A behavior technician is teaching a client to greet others. The technician provides reinforcement after every single instance of the client saying hi when someone enters the room. What schedule of reinforcement is being used? A. Variable ratio, VR. B. Fixed ratio, FR. C. Variable interval, VI. D. Continuous reinforcement, CRF. Answer: D. Continuous reinforcement, CRF. Continuous reinforcement, CRF, is a schedule where reinforcement is provided for every single occurrence of the target behavior. The phrase "after every single instance" is the key indicator of a CRF schedule. CRF is often used when first teaching a new behavior to ensure rapid acquisition. While not always practical for maintenance, it's highly effective for establishing a behavior quickly. Every time the behavior happens, they get reinforced. That's CRF. Question 13. Which of the following is a key advantage of using a functional analysis compared to other functional assessment methods? A. It is typically less time-consuming to conduct. B. It allows for the direct demonstration of cause and effect relationships between environment and behavior. C. It relies on subjective reports from caregivers. D. It is primarily used for assessing skill deficits. Answer: B. It allows for the direct demonstration of cause and effect relationships between environment and behavior. This question highlights the main strength of a functional analysis. By systematically manipulating antecedents and consequences, a functional analysis can demonstrate a clear causal link between environmental events and the occurrence of a behavior. Unlike descriptive or indirect assessments, which show correlations, functional analysis shows causation. This makes it the most precise method for determining the function of a behavior. Functional analysis helps you definitively prove why a behavior is happening. Question 14. A behavior analyst wants to increase a client's compliance with instructions. When the client follows an instruction example, sit down, the analyst delivers praise. Great job following directions. However, the analyst also notices that the client rarely complies with instructions if they are delivered too quickly after another instruction. This suggests the speed of instruction delivery might be a relevant factor. This antecedent condition, speed of instruction delivery, is considered a type of A. Discriminative stimulus, SD. B. Stimulus prompt. C. Motivating operation, MO. D. Conditioned reinforcer. Answer C. Motivating operation, MO. This question describes a motivating operation, MO, specifically likely an abolishing operation, AO, or perhaps aspects of a punishing effects, MO. MIMOs are environmental events that affect the value of a reinforcer and the probability of behaviors that have been previously reinforced by that reinforcer. Delivering instructions too quickly, the antecedent condition, changes the effectiveness of compliance as a behavior that produces reinforcement, praise or successful task completion, and influences the likelihood of compliance occurring. It doesn't directly signal reinforcement like an SD, nor is it a prompt or reinforcer. MOs change how much you want something and how likely you are to do the behavior that gets it. Question 15. A researcher is studying the effects of a new teaching method on reading fluency. They measure reading fluency before implementing the new method, then implement the method, and finally measure reading fluency after the method has been used. This type of research design is known as A. Multiple baseline design. B. Reversal, ABEL, design. C. Changing criterion design. D. Pre-test post-test design, group design equivalent. Answer D. Pre-test post-test design, group design equivalent. While single subject designs are common in ABA, this question describes a research design more typical of group research, where measurements are taken before and after an intervention is applied to see the overall effect. The structure of measuring before, pre-test, implementing the intervention, and measuring after, post-test, is the defining characteristic. Although not a single subject design like ABA or multiple baseline, understanding this basic research structure is relevant to interpreting research findings. This design shows if a change occurred after the intervention, but doesn't prove the intervention caused the change as clearly as single subject designs. Question 16. Which statement best describes the principle of parsimony in behavior analysis? A. Interventions should be ethical and least restrictive. B. Behavior should be explained in terms of observable and measurable events. C. The simplest, most logical explanation for a phenomenon should be selected. D. Research findings should be replicated across different individuals and settings. Answer C. The simplest, most logical explanation for a phenomenon should be selected. Parsimony is one of the philosophical assumptions of behavior analysis and science in general, stating that when multiple explanations for a phenomenon exist, the simplest explanation that accounts for all the data is preferred. It guides analysts to look for the most straightforward environmental explanations for behavior before resorting to more complex or hypothetical constructs. It encourages efficiency in understanding and intervention development. Choose the simplest explanation that fits the evidence. Question 17. A behavior technician is teaching a client to imitate actions. The technician says, "Do this," and claps their hands. The client claps their hands. The technician then says, "Do this," and stomps their foot. The client stomps their foot. This type of verbal behavior is known as A. Mand, B. Tact, C. Etroik, D. Motor imitation. Answer: D. Motor imitation. This question describes motor imitation, which involves reproducing the physical movements of a model. The technician is providing a model, clapping, stomping, accompanied by a verbal SD. "Do this," and the client is copying the physical action. This is different from echoic behavior, which is vocal imitation. Teaching imitation is a foundational skill in many ABA programs. When you copy someone's actions, like waving back when they wave at you, you are engaging in motor imitation. Question 18. A behavior analyst is developing a behavior reduction plan for a client's hitting behavior. The analyst hypothesizes the behavior is maintained by attention. Which of the following interventions would be most consistent with a function-based approach if attention is the identified function? A. Implement a token economy for appropriate behavior. B. Withhold attention whenever hitting occurs and provide attention for appropriate alternative behaviors. C. Provide a timeout every time hitting occurs. D. Implement a response cost procedure for hitting. Answer: B. Withhold attention whenever hitting occurs and provide attention for appropriate alternative behaviors. This question emphasizes a function-based approach to intervention. If the behavior is maintained by attention, the intervention should directly address that function. Withholding attention for hitting, extinction, removes the maintaining consequence, while providing attention for alternative behaviors provides a functional equivalent replacement. A function-based approach matches the intervention strategy to the hypothesized reason the behavior occurs. If they hit for attention, block the attention for hitting and give it for something else instead. Question 19. Which dimension of ABA refers to the focus on behaviors that are important and significant to the individual and society? A. Applied. B. Behavioral. C. Analytic. D. Technological. Answer: A. Applied. The applied dimension of ABA means that the focus of interventions is on behaviors that are socially significant and have immediate importance to the individual and their community. This ensures that behavior analytic efforts are directed towards improving lives in meaningful ways. It's about working on behaviors that truly matter in the real world. ABA is applied because it addresses issues that are important to people's lives. Question 20. A behavior technician is collecting data on the duration of a client's tantrum behavior. They start a stopwatch when the tantrum begins and stop it when the tantrum ends. What dimension of behavior is the technician measuring? A. Frequency. B. Latency. C. Duration. D. Interresponse time. IRT. Answer: C. Duration. This question describes measuring the duration of a behavior, which is the length of time the behavior occurs from start to finish. Starting and stopping a stopwatch when the behavior begins and ends is the standard method for measuring duration. Frequency is the count, latency is the time from cue to behavior, and IRT is the time between responses. Measuring how long a behavior lasts is measuring its duration. Question 21. Which of the following is a potential side effect of punishment that might be observed? A. Increased variability of behavior. B. Increased emotional responses, example, crying, aggression. C. Increased frequency of the punished behavior. D. Development of learned helplessness, making escape more likely. Answer: B. Increased emotional responses, example, crying, aggression. While punishment can decrease behavior, it can also have undesirable side effects, including increased emotional behavior like crying or aggression, avoidance of the punisher, or response suppression. Increased variability of behavior and increased frequency of the punished behavior are not typical side effects. In fact, punishment aims to decrease frequency. Learned helplessness typically makes escape less likely, not more. Be aware that punishment comes with potential downsides. Question 22. A behavior analyst is using a token economy with a client. The client earns tokens for completing tasks and can exchange a certain number of tokens for backup reinforcers, like extra screen time or a small toy. The tokens themselves are examples of A. Primary reinforcers. B. Unconditioned punishers. C. Conditioned reinforcers. D. Negative reinforcers. Answer: C. Conditioned reinforcers. Tokens in a token economy are examples of conditioned reinforcers. They acquire their reinforcing value by being paired with or exchanged for other reinforcers. The backup reinforcers. They are not biologically important, primary, nor are they punishers or negative reinforcers. Conditioned reinforcers gain their power through association with other things the client likes. Money is a great example of a conditioned reinforcer. It's not valuable on its own, but because you can exchange it for things you want. Question 23. A behavior technician is teaching a client to imitate saying words. The technician says ball, and the client says ball. This is an example of what type of verbal behavior? A. Manned. B. Tact. C. Echoic. D. Intraverbal. Answer: C. Echoic. This scenario describes echoic behavior, which is vocal imitation, where the speaker repeats what someone else says. The technician provides a vocal model, ball, and the client repeats the exact sound or word, ball. This is different from tacts, labeling, mands, requesting, or intraverbals, conversational responses. Echoic behavior is simply repeating what you hear. Question 24. In a stimulus equivalence procedure, if a client is taught that A equals B and B equals C, and subsequently demonstrates that A equals C without direct training, this is an example of A. Reflexivity. B. Symmetry. C. Transitivity. D. Arbitrary relations. Answer: C. Transitivity. Transitivity is a property of stimulus equivalence, where if stimulus A is equivalent to stimulus B, and stimulus B is equivalent to stimulus C, then stimulus A is also equivalent to stimulus C without specific training for that S-C relationship. Reflexivity is at equals A, and symmetry is if A equals B, then B equals A. The example shows the emergence of A equals C based on the trained A equals B and B equals C relations. Transitivity is like the if-then rule in equivalence. If A and B are related and B and C are related, then A and C must be related too. Question 25. A behavior technician records every instance of a client raising their hand in class. What type of data collection method is being used? A. Duration recording. B. Interval recording. C. Event recording. D. Latency recording. Answer: C. Event recording. This question describes event recording, also known as frequency recording, which involves counting every time a specific behavior occurs. The phrase records every instance indicates that each occurrence of raising their hand is being counted. Duration measures time, interval recording breaks time into blocks, and latency measures time from cue to response. Counting how many times a behavior happens is event recording. Question 26. Which type of stimulus control occurs when a behavior is more likely to occur in the presence of a particular stimulus than in its absence, because the behavior has been reinforced only when that stimulus was present? A. Respondent conditioning. B. Discrimination. C. Generalization. D. Extinction. Answer: B. Discrimination. Discrimination occurs when a behavior comes under the control of specific stimuli, meaning the behavior is reinforced in the presence of that stimulus, the SD, but not in its absence, the S delta or SD. The behavior is discriminating between the conditions where reinforcement is available and where it is not. Generalization is the opposite, where the behavior occurs in similar stimuli. The question describes the process by which an SD gains control over behavior. Discrimination is learning when and where to do a behavior to get reinforced. Question 27. A behavior analyst is teaching a client to follow a visual schedule. The analyst points to the first picture on the schedule example, snack time. What type of prompt is the analyst using? A. Verbal prompt. B. Model prompt. C. Gestural prompt. D. Physical prompt. Answer: C. Gestural prompt. This question describes a gestural prompt, which is a physical movement or gesture used to help the learner perform the target behavior. Pointing to the picture on the schedule is a gesture that directs the client's attention or action towards the correct step. A verbal prompt would be saying something, a model prompt would be demonstrating the behavior, and a physical prompt would involve touching the client. Pointing, nodding, or looking are common gestural prompts. Question 28. A behavior analyst is working with a client who engages in self-injurious behavior, BCBA. The Behavior Analysis Certification Board's ethical code requires that behavior analysts recommend the least restrictive procedures likely to be effective. This principle aligns with which ethical guideline? A. Responsibility to clients. B. Responsibility to the profession. C. Responsibility in public statements. D. Responsibility to the BCBA. Answer: A. Responsibility to clients. The ethical guideline requiring the use of least restrictive procedures falls under the behavior analyst's responsibility to their clients. This principle emphasizes protecting the client's rights and ensuring their well-being by prioritizing interventions that are effective while minimizing potential harm or limitations on their freedom. It's about doing what's best for the client while respecting their rights and dignity. Always choose interventions that are effective but also the least limiting for the client. Question 29. A behavior technician is using discrete trial training, DTT. Each trial involves presenting an antecedent, SD, providing a prompt, if needed, waiting for the client's response, delivering a consequence, reinforcement or error correction, and then a brief intertrial interval, ITI. What is the role of the intertrial interval, ITI, in DTT? A. It serves as a punishment for incorrect responses. B. It allows for the termination of the trial after a correct response. C. It is a brief pause between trials, allowing the technician to prepare for the next trial and the client to process the previous one. D. It is the stimulus that signals the availability of reinforcement. Answer: C. It is a brief pause between trials, allowing the technician to prepare for the next trial and the client to process the previous one. The inner trial interval, ITI, in DTT is simply the short period of time between the end of one trial, after the consequence, and the presentation of the antecedent for the next trial. It provides a clear break and allows for organization and transition. It's not a consequence itself. The ITI is just the short quiet time between one teaching opportunity and the next. Question 30. Which dimension of ABA refers to the clear and concise description of procedures so that they can be replicated by others? A. Applied. B. Behavioral. C. Analytic. D. Technological. Answer: D. Technological. The technological dimension of ABA means that behavior change procedures are described with enough detail and clarity that another trained professional could read the description and replicate the intervention exactly. This allows for consistency in implementation and contributes to the scientific nature of the field. It means writing your plans like a recipe so anyone else can follow it precisely. Question 31. A behavior analyst is conducting a paired stimulus preference assessment with a client. They present two stimuli simultaneously and allow the client to choose one. After the client chooses, the chosen stimulus is not returned to the selection pool for subsequent trials. Which type of paired stimulus assessment variation is this likely describing? A. Multiple stimulus without replacement, MSWO, though this uses more than two at a time. B. Multiple stimulus with replacement, MSW, though this uses more than two at a time. C. Paired stimulus, forced choice. D. Single stimulus. Answer: C. Paired stimulus, forced choice. This question describes the standard paired stimulus preference assessment, also known as forced choice. The core of this method is presenting two stimuli at a time, paired stimulus, and recording which one the client chooses. The phrase "present two stimuli simultaneously" is the key identifier. Although MSWO also removes the chosen item, it involves presenting multiple, more than two, stimuli, not just two. Paired stimulus always presents choices in pairs. Question 32. A behavior technician is teaching a client to brush their teeth using forward chaining. The technician prompts the client through all steps except the first step, which the client performs independently. Once the client can independently perform the first step reliably, the technician will require the client to perform the first two steps independently, and so on. What type of chaining is being used? A. Total task chaining. B. Forward chaining. C. Backward chaining. D. Behavior chain interruption strategy. Answer: B. Forward chaining. This scenario describes forward chaining, which involves teaching the steps of a behavior chain in their naturally occurring order, starting with the first step. The technician teaches the first step first, reinforcing its completion, and then gradually adds subsequent steps to the chain as the client masters the earlier ones. Backward chaining teaches the last step first. The phrase "starting with the first step" and "building forward" is the hallmark of forward chaining. You build the chain from the beginning to the end. Question 33. Which of the following is an example of a stimulus generalization? A. A child says dog only when seeing their own pet dog. B. A child says dog when they see their pet dog, a neighbor's dog, and pictures of dogs. C. A child says dog only when prompted by a picture of a dog. D. A child says dog after someone asks what says woof. Answer: B. A child says dog when they see their pet dog, a neighbor's dog, and pictures of dogs. Stimulus generalization occurs when a learned behavior occurs in the presence of stimuli that are similar to the original discriminative stimulus, SD. In this example, the child learned to say dog in the presence of one dog, the original SD, but then says it in the presence of other similar stimuli, other dogs, pictures of dogs. This shows the behavior is generalizing across different dog stimuli. If you learn to respond to one thing and then respond similarly to similar things, that's stimulus generalization. Question 34. A behavior analyst is reviewing data that shows a client's hitting behavior is decreasing over time. The data points are relatively close to each other and show a consistent downward trend. The variability in the data is low. This low variability suggests: A. The intervention is likely ineffective. B. There is a high degree of stimulus control over the behavior. C. Extraneous variables are well controlled. D. The behavior is likely maintained by multiple functions. Answer: C. Extraneous variables are well controlled. Low variability in data suggests that factors other than the planned intervention are not significantly influencing the behavior. When extraneous variables, confounding factors, are well controlled, The data points tend to be stable and show a clear trend, allowing for a clearer demonstration of the intervention's effect. High variability often indicates poor control over the environment. Consistent data trends suggest you have good control over the situation. Question 35. Which of the following is the best example of an observable and measurable behavior? A. The client felt sad. B. The client understands the instruction. C. The client wrote their name on the paper. D. The client was angry about the change. Answer: C. The client wrote their name on the paper. The dimension of behavioral in ABA means focusing on observable and measurable actions. Wrote their name on the paper is a clear, concrete action that can be seen and measured. Example: frequency of writing, legibility, etc. Feeling sad, understanding, and being angry are internal states that are not directly observable or measurable behaviors themselves, though they might be inferred from observable behaviors. Behavior must be something you can see or hear and count or time. Question 36. A behavior technician presents a demand to a client. The client engages in aggressive behavior. The technician immediately removes the demand. As a result, the client's aggressive behavior increases in the future when demands are presented. This is an example of A. Positive punishment. B. Negative punishment. C. Positive reinforcement. D. Negative reinforcement. Answer: D. Negative reinforcement. This scenario describes negative reinforcement. A stimulus, the demand, is removed. Negative, contingent on the behavior, aggression, and this results in an increase in the future frequency of that behavior, aggression. The aggression is reinforced by the removal of the unpleasant stimulus, the demand, when a behavior helps you escape or avoid something you don't like, and that behavior increases its negative reinforcement. Question 37. A behavior analyst is using a visual schedule with a client. The client touches the picture representing snack time before going to the snack area. This action of touching the picture serves as a conditioned stimulus, CS, B. Discriminative stimulus, SD. C. Unconditioned stimulus, US. D. Motivating operation, MO. Answer: B. Discriminative stimulus, SD. In this context, the picture representing snack time is functioning as an SD for the behavior of going to the snack area. The client has learned that touching or attending to this picture signals that reinforcement, getting a snack, is available for the behavior that follows, going to the snack area. It's a cue that tells the client what to do next to access reinforcement. The picture tells the client snack time is next, and if you go there, you get snack. Question 38. Which ethical principle emphasizes promoting the well-being of the client and protecting them from harm? A. Beneficence and non-maleficence. B. Fidelity and responsibility. C. Integrity. D. Justice. Answer: A. Beneficence and non-maleficence. The ethical principle of beneficence and non-maleficence is central to behavior analysis and other helping professions. Beneficence means actively working to benefit the client, do good, and non-maleficence means avoiding or minimizing harm, do no harm. This principle guides decisions about intervention choices, risk assessment, and prioritizing client welfare. The core ethical duty is to help and to avoid causing harm. Question 39. A behavior technician is teaching a client to label pictures. The technician holds up a picture of a cat and says, "What is it?" Cat. The client says, "Cat." The technician is using what type of prompt fading? A. Stimulus fading. B. Response prompt fading, specifically within prompt fading. C. Prompt delay. D. Stimulus shape transformation. Answer: B. Response prompt fading, specifically within prompt fading. The technician is providing a response prompt, the echoic prompt, CAT, and is likely planning to fade this prompt over time, so the client can respond independently to the picture alone, saying, "What is it?" CAT, and then just, "What is it?" Or eventually nothing before the client's response would be examples of fading this verbal response prompt. This is fading a prompt that helps the client make the correct response. The prompt is the CAT, the technician says, and they will fade that away. Question 40. Which of the following is the most precise definition of the term environment in behavior analysis? A. The natural world surrounding the individual. B. The physical location where the behavior occurs. C. The total constellation of stimuli that can affect behavior. D. The social interactions experienced by the individual. Answer: C. The total constellation of stimuli that can affect behavior. In behavior analysis, the environment is broadly defined as everything surrounding the individual that can influence their behavior, including internal and external stimuli, physical surroundings, social interactions, and historical events. It's not limited to just the physical location or social interactions, but encompasses all relevant variables. Think of the environment as everything outside the behavior itself that might influence it. Question 41. A behavior analyst is using a changing criterion design to increase the number of math problems a student completes. The analyst sets an initial criterion example, complete 3 problems, reinforces the student for meeting it, then raises the criterion example, complete 5 problems, reinforces meeting that, and so on. What is the primary advantage of this design? A. It does not require withdrawing the intervention. B. It is effective for behaviors that should decrease. C. It requires multiple participants or settings. D. It isolates the effect of each component of a treatment package. Answer: A. It does not require withdrawing the intervention. A key advantage of the changing criterion design is that it demonstrates experimental control by showing that the behavior changes systematically as the criterion for reinforcement changes, without needing to remove the intervention, like in a reversal design. This is particularly useful for behaviors that you don't want to see decrease, such as academic performance or exercise. This design shows your intervention works by watching the behavior match your step-by-step goals without having to stop the intervention. Question 4.2. A child throws toys when they want attention. The behavior analyst instructs the parent to ignore the toy throwing and only provide attention when the child is playing nicely with toys. This intervention utilizes which 2 behavioral principles? A. Punishment and negative reinforcement. B. Extinction and differential reinforcement. C. Positive reinforcement and negative punishment. D. Response cost and timeout. Answer: B. Extinction and differential reinforcement. This intervention combines extinction, withholding attention for the toy throwing, with differential reinforcement, reinforcing playing nicely with toys, which is an alternative behavior that serves the same function or is incompatible. This is a common and effective strategy for reducing problem behaviors by addressing the function, attention, and teaching a better way to get it. You stop reinforcing the problem behavior and start reinforcing a better behavior instead. Question 43. A behavior technician is recording data on head slapping behavior. They divide an observation period into 10-second intervals. They record whether the behavior occurs at any point during each 10-second interval. What type of interval recording is being used? A. Partial interval recording. B. Whole interval recording. C. Momentary time sampling. D. Frequency recording. Answer: A. Partial interval recording. Partial interval recording involves recording the target behavior if it occurs at any time during the specified interval, even if it only occurs for a moment. The phrase, whether the behavior occurs at any point during each 10-second interval, defines this method. Whole interval recording requires the behavior to occur throughout the entire interval, and momentary time sampling requires it to occur only at the very end of the interval. Partial interval recording often overestimates the duration but can be useful for high-frequency behaviors. If the behavior happens even for a second during the interval, you mark it down. Question 44. Which ethical consideration is most relevant when determining the specific target behaviors for an intervention program? A. Competence. B. Integrity. C. Social validity. D. Professional development. Answer: C. Social validity. Social validity refers to whether the goals of the intervention, the procedures used, and the results achieved are acceptable, relevant, and important to the client, their family, and society. When selecting target behaviors, it is crucial to ensure they are socially significant and will improve the client's life in a meaningful way, aligning directly with the concept of social validity. Are the behaviors you are working on actually important and meaningful to the person and their family? That's social validity. Question 45. A behavior analyst is using a shaping procedure to teach a client to say, bubble. The client initially babbles. The analyst reinforces sounds like buh. Then they only reinforce sounds like bub. Finally, they only reinforce bubble. This involves reinforcing successive approximations to the target behavior. What is a potential challenge when using shaping? A. The behavior may decrease instead of increase. B. It requires the behavior to be already in the client's repertoire. C. Progress may be slow and it requires careful monitoring of approximations. D. It is primarily used for reducing behaviors, not increasing them. Answer: C. Progress may be slow and it requires careful monitoring of approximations. Shaping involves reinforcing closer and closer steps, successive approximations, to a final target behavior. This requires careful observation to identify and reinforce slight improvements and can be a time-consuming process, especially if the behavior is complex or the client progresses slowly. It does increase behavior and is used for behaviors not currently in the repertoire at full strength. Shaping needs patience and a sharp eye to catch those small improvements. Question 46. A behavior technician is using a picture exchange communication system, PECS, with a client. The client gives a picture of a cookie to the technician, and the technician immediately gives the client a cookie. The picture of the cookie functions as a N. A. Conditioned stimulus, CS. B. Motivating operation, MO. C. Response. D. Discriminative stimulus, SD. Answer: D. Discriminative stimulus, SD. In this PECS exchange, the picture of the cookie is the SD. It signals to the technician that presenting the picture, the response, is the behavior that will be reinforced by receiving the cookie. The picture cues the technician about what the client is meant for and sets the occasion for the technician to provide reinforcement contingent on the client's response. The picture tells the listener, the technician, what the speaker, the client, wants. Question 47. Which experimental design is characterized by baseline measurement, implementation of an intervention, removal of the intervention, and then reimplementation of the intervention example, a B? A. Multiple baseline design. B. Changing criterion design. C. Reversal ABA design. D. Alternating treatments design. Answer: C. Reversal ABA design. The AB design, or reversal design, is defined by the sequence of conditions. AB baseline, B intervention. A return to baseline by withdrawing intervention. And B reimplementation of intervention. This design demonstrates experimental control by showing that the behavior changes predictably as the intervention is introduced and withdrawn. It's called reversal because you reverse back to baseline conditions to see if the behavior goes back to original levels. Question 48. A client typically engages in hand flapping when they are bored. A behavior analyst programs increased access to engaging activities throughout the day, and the hand flapping decreases. This is an example of an intervention based on which function? A. Attention. B. Escape. C. Tangible. D. Automatic. Answer: D. Automatic. Behaviors maintained by automatic reinforcement produce their own consequences without the mediation of another person. Hand flapping for stimulation when bored often falls into this category. The behavior itself provides the sensory input that is reinforcing. Increasing engaging activities addresses the lack of stimulation, making the automatic reinforcement from hand flapping less valuable or necessary. If the behavior happens when the person is alone and no one provides a consequence, it's often automatically reinforced. Question 49. A behavior technician is conducting a free operant preference assessment. They place several potential reinforcers in a room and observe which items the client interacts with and for how long. What is a key advantage of this method? A. It ranks stimuli from most to least preferred. B. It is highly structured and requires minimal observation. C. It assesses preferences without requiring specific responses from the client. D. It is most effective for clients with limited scanning abilities. Answer: C. It assesses preferences without requiring specific responses from the client. A free operant preference assessment involves simply observing what stimuli the individual spontaneously interacts with when given unrestricted access to a variety of items. It doesn't require the client to make choices between items or respond to specific prompts. This makes it less intrusive and potentially more representative of preferences in a natural setting. You just let the person freely interact with items and see what they naturally go to. Question 50. Which ethical guideline is most concerned with being truthful and accurate in your work and professional interactions? A. Beneficence and non-maleficence. B. Integrity. C. Professional development. D. Justice. Answer: B. Integrity. The ethical principle of integrity requires behavior analysts to be truthful, honest, and act in a consistent manner with their professional obligations. This includes accurately reporting data, being transparent in communication, and avoiding deceptive practices. Maintaining integrity is fundamental to building trust with clients, colleagues, and the public. Being truthful and honest in all aspects of your work is about acting with integrity.